November 12, 1944. Camp 23, Devisers, Wiltshire. The knock came at dawn, metallic and deliberate. 3 sharp raps that sent frost through the wooden barracks. Greta Hoffman's breath caught. She'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the other women shift and whisper in the darkness. Now the sound she'd been dreading had arrived. Boots on gravel, the scrape of a door latch, the low murmur of English voices outside. She pulled her threadbare Wehrmacht issue blanket tighter, feeling the rough wool scratch against her collarbone. The air smelled of damp wood and unwashed bodies, of fear fermenting in close quarters. Someone whimpered 2 bunks over. Greta closed her eyes. This was it. The moment they'd been warned about since capture. The moment when British fury would finally reveal itself. If you're fascinated by untold stories from World War II, subscribe now. We're uncovering the human moments history tried to bury. The door swung open. Cold November light spilled across the floorboards. 3 British soldiers stood in the threshold, their uniforms crisp despite the early hour, their faces unreadable. The tallest one, a sergeant with graying temples, carried something bulky folded over his arm. Greta's stomach clenched. She'd heard the stories on the transport ship. What happened to German women in enemy hands, how the British and Americans took their revenge for bombed cities and dead children. The propaganda film she'd been shown in training had been explicit about the fate awaiting captured Axis personnel. Degradation, starvation, worse. Up, the sergeant said in accented German. All of you. Line formation. 32 women stumbled from their bunks, some still dressed in the mud-stained uniforms they had worn for 6 days straight since processing. Greta stood between Margot Weber, a former switchboard operator from Hamburg, who'd been captured at a communications post in Normandy, and Annalisa Schaefer, a 23-year-old nursing auxiliary taken at Kong when the hospital unit was overrun in July. They learned each other's names on the ship, a converted freighter that had pitched sickeningly across the channel, the hold rank with vomit and diesel fumes. None of them had eaten more than a bowl of potato soup in 3 days. The sergeant stepped forward, the bundle in his arms unfolded, dark wool, heavy and intact. He held it out to the nearest woman, a clerk named Frida, who'd worked in a supply depot before capture. She stared at it as if it might bite. "Take it," he said. Not unkind, simply matter of fact. Frida's hands trembled as she reached out. The coat was British Army regulation, winter issue, lined with flannel, real buttons, no holes. The sergeant moved down the line, 2 privates following with armloads of similar garments. Within minutes, every woman in the barracks held a coat. Some started crying before they even put them on. Greta pulled hers around her shoulders. The weight was astonishing. How long had it been since she'd worn anything that wasn't falling apart? The wool still held warmth from wherever it had been stored. She pressed her face against the collar and smelled soap. Clean soap. Her throat constricted. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This wasn't what she'd been prepared for. "There's breakfast in the mess," the sergeant added. "Porridge, tea. Come when you're ready." He left. The door closed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Annalisa started laughing, a broken, hysterical sound that quickly dissolved into sobs. Margot sank onto her bunk, clutching the coat to her chest. Greta stood frozen, feeling the world tilt on an axis she didn't yet understand. They screamed at the knock. They cried over a wool coat. That moment changed everything. They had been combat auxiliaries, nurses, clerks, the women who kept the Wehrmacht's machinery running behind the front lines. Greta had typed requisition forms at a supply depot outside Karamtan. Annalisa had bandaged soldiers at a field hospital. Margot had routed radio communications through portable switchboards. They weren't fighters, but the British Army made no distinction when the Americans and British forces swept through Normandy in the summer of 1944. You wore the uniform, you carried the papers, you were captured. Greta remembered the moment clearly. July 17th, late afternoon, the depot already half abandoned. Officers had fled 2 days earlier, taking the vehicles and most of the food. She'd been sitting at her desk trying to decide whether to run or wait when American soldiers appeared in the doorway. Young men with rifles and Oklahoma accents, chewing gum like this was all routine. They'd searched her, checked her papers, and loaded her onto a truck with 11 other women. No violence, no screaming, just efficiency. The grinding gears of logistics, processing human cargo. The collection point had been a commandeered school near Bayeux. Hundreds of prisoners, mostly men, field gray uniforms caked with mud and blood, faces hollow with shock. The women were separated immediately, herded into a basement classroom where they spent 4 days sleeping on stone floors, sharing 2 buckets for sanitation. An RAF officer came once to record their names and ranks. He spoke bad German and didn't meet their eyes. They signed papers they couldn't read. Then came the trucks to the coast, the converted freighter, the 6-day crossing to Southampton in a cargo hold that stank of rust and fear. Processing at Southampton had been bewildering in its orderliness. They stood in lines, alphabetically arranged. British nurses checked them for lice and disease, efficient, impersonal, not cruel. They were photographed, fingerprinted, issued provisional ration cards. Then trains north, steam carriages with broken windows, countryside rolling past in November gray, sheep dotting hillsides that looked nothing like France or Germany. They'd arrived at Camp 23 in Devizes just before nightfall the previous day, exhausted and terrified, certain that the real horrors would begin once the sun went down. Instead, coats, breakfast, tea served in actual cups with handles. The mess hall was a converted Nissen hut with a cold stove radiating heat. Greta stood in the doorway, momentarily paralyzed by the warmth. The smell hit her next. Porridge. Real porridge with milk and something else underneath it. Bread. Fresh bread. Her stomach cramped violently. Beside her, Annalisa made a small, wounded sound. British soldiers stood behind serving tables, ladling portions into bowls. The line moved forward. Greta found herself holding a bowl of steaming oats, a slice of brown bread, a tin cup of tea so hot it burned her fingers through the metal. She sat at a long wooden table with the others and stared at the food. Margot took the first bite, tentative, as if testing for poison. Then her face crumpled, and she began eating with desperate focus, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Greta ate slowly, forcing herself to chew, to breathe between bites. The oats tasted of salt and butter, real butter, not the ersatz fat they'd had for 2 years in Germany. The bread was dense and slightly sweet, nothing like the sawdust loaves she'd remembered from Berlin. She'd forgotten food could taste like this. She'd forgotten she could feel full. Across the room, a British corporal played a gramophone. Jazz spilled from the horn. American music, forbidden music, the kind that would have gotten you reported in Stuttgart. Nobody moved to turn it off. The corporal nodded along, cleaning cups at a wash basin. "Why?" Annalisa whispered. "Why are they doing this?" Greta had no answer. The propaganda had been clear. The British and Americans were savages, vengeance-driven, corrupted by Jewish influence and Bolshevik sympathies. They would exact payment for every bomb that fell on London, every ship sunk in the Atlantic. That was what Greta had been told. That was what she'd half believed, lying awake on the transport ship while waves hammered the hull. But here was porridge, here were coats, here was jazz. Music, and a coal stove, and a British sergeant asking in careful German if anyone needed medical attention. The camp settled into rhythm over the following days, a rhythm so incomprehensibly normal that it felt like madness.
Greta and the others were assigned to a barracks block with bunks, real mattresses stuffed with horsehair and wool blankets that didn't have holes. There were latrines with plumbing, cold water only, but running water nonetheless. A clinic staffed by a British doctor and a Welsh nurse who spoke no German but smiled when dispensing aspirin. Work assignments came on the fourth day. Nothing brutal. Some women were sent to sort and fold linens for the camp laundry, others to peel vegetables in the kitchen. Greta was assigned to the camp office, typing requisition forms, exactly what she'd done for the Wehrmacht, only now the letterhead read British Army, Western Command. The typewriter was an imperial, the keys stiff but functional. She sat at a desk by a window, watching November rain turn the parade ground to mud, typing lists of supplies with the surreal precision of someone living inside a dream. The truth about P camps will shock you. Hit like if you want to see more stories like this, and tell us in the comments which camp you want us to investigate next. The food remained incomprehensible. Breakfast porridge every morning, sometimes with a spoonful of jam. Lunch was soup, vegetable or lentil, with bread and margarine. Dinner brought potatoes, occasionally with a sliver of corned beef or a scoop of beans and tomato sauce. It wasn't luxury, but it was regular. It was more than she'd eaten in Germany for the past year, more than she'd seen most civilians get after the heavy bombing raids began. Margot calculated the calories obsessively, whispering numbers to herself at night, unable to reconcile what they were receiving with what they'd been promised to expect. The cognitive dissonance ate at them. Annalisa started keeping a diary. Scraps of paper begged from the office, pencil stubs hoarded like treasure. She read passages aloud, sometimes in the barracks after lights out, her voice small in the darkness. November 19th, 1944. Today, the Welsh nurse gave me real penicillin for my infected finger. She cleaned the wound carefully, bandaged it with actual gauze, and told me to come back tomorrow. I don't understand. They were told they would let us die of minor injuries. They were supposed to enjoy our suffering. But she smiled at me. She touched my hand like I was human. The days accumulated. December arrived with frost and clear skies. The women were permitted to write letters home, one per month, subject to censorship, but real letters nonetheless. Greta wrote to her mother in Berlin, careful phrases about her health and safety, nothing that would alarm the censors. She didn't mention the coats or the food or the fact that she'd gained 4 pounds in 3 weeks. She wasn't sure her mother would believe it. She wasn't sure she believed it herself. Some of the British guards began conversations, awkward, halting exchanges in broken German or rudimentary English. A corporal named Davies showed Greta a photograph of his wife and daughter in Cardiff. "Bombing's bad there too," he said. "Lost me brother in North Africa. But you didn't kill him, did you? You were typing forms." He shrugged, tucked the photograph away. "War's not on you, love. War's on the bastards who started it." Greta had no response. She had voted for the party in 1933. She'd believed, at least partially, in the promises of order and strength. She'd watched Jewish neighbors disappear and told herself it wasn't her concern. The weight of that participation was a stone in her stomach, impossible to digest. But Davis's casual absolution, "War is not on you," felt obscene in its simplicity, even as part of her desperately wanted to accept it. Margot's transformation came first. She'd been the most ideologically committed of their group, a League of German Girls leader before the war, fervent in her belief that the Reich represented civilization's last defense against barbarism. But Margot was also a practical woman, an engineer's daughter from Hamburg who believed in evidence. The evidence accumulated relentlessly. The mail delivery worked. The medical care continued. Guards treated them with distant professionalism, sometimes boredom, occasionally kindness, never cruelty. When Frida developed pneumonia in early December, she was transferred to a civilian hospital in town for 5 days, treated with sulfonamide, and returned to camp fully recovered. "They saved my life," she said, sitting on her bunk with the hospital discharge papers in her lap. "They didn't have to. They could have let me die. They saved me." Margot sat with those facts for 3 days, silent and withdrawn. Then she approached Greta in the mess hall, her face pale. "It was all lies," she said. "Everything they told us. The British aren't monsters. The Americans aren't savages. We were the monsters. We were the savages. We bombed their cities and murdered their people, and we were the monsters all along." Greta wanted to argue, to defend something, but the words wouldn't come. She thought about the depot outside Carrington, the requisition form she'd typed for ammunition and rations, the efficient machinery of war she'd helped maintain. She thought about her mother's letters from Berlin, the ones that stopped mentioning their Jewish neighbor Rosenberg after 1938, the silence that substituted for explanation. She thought about the coat around her shoulders and the bread in her stomach, and the unbearable kindness of captivity. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, we were." Christmas came with unexpected ceremony. The British camp commandant, a middle-aged and weary Lieutenant Colonel Hartley, arranged for a small evergreen tree to be erected in the mess hall. Decorations appeared, paper chains folded by prisoners, a few glass baubles donated by townswomen from devices, candles in tin holders. On Christmas Eve, the women were permitted to sing carols. They chose carefully, avoiding anything too martial, settling on Stille Nacht, Silent Night, the one carol that transcended borders. Greta stood among her companions, their voices thin and uncertain at first, then growing stronger. Annalisa harmonized, her nursing training giving her perfect pitch. Margot wept quietly, tears dripping onto her collar. A British chaplain, an elderly Anglican priest with kind eyes, stood at the back and listened without interrupting. When they finished, he approached and said in slow, careful German, "God hears all prayers, even from those who think he stopped listening, especially from them." Dinner that night included roasted chicken, actual chicken, half a breast per woman, with boiled potatoes and carrots, and a slice of Christmas pudding that tasted of dried fruit and brandy. It wasn't luxury, but it was regular. It was more than she'd eaten in Germany for the past year, more than she'd seen most civilians get after the heavy bombing raids began. She ate slowly, reverently, aware that this meal represented resources allocated deliberately, generosity extended across enemy lines. The absurdity made her want to laugh and scream simultaneously. After dinner, Corporal Davies taught them to play cards. Whist, he called it, a British trick-taking game. They sat around a table in the barracks, guards and prisoners mixing casually, while Davies explained the rules in patient, broken German. He won the first 3 hands. Then Annalisa started winning, her face flushed with concentration and something that might have been joy. When she took the 5th hand with a clever trump, Davies laughed, genuine delight, and said, "Bloody hell, you're sharp. Could have used you in intelligence." The casual compliment landed like a grenade. Annalisa froze, cards still in her hand, her expression stricken. Davies realized his mistake immediately. "Sorry, love, didn't mean..." He trailed off, helpless. "It's fine," Annalisa said quietly, but she excused herself shortly after, retreating to her bunk. Greta found her later, staring at the ceiling, her diary open on her chest. December 25th, 1945. They gave us Christmas. They gave us chicken. and pudding and card games and laughter. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to hold it alongside everything else. What we did, what we believed, what we were. Corporal Davies said I was sharp. He meant it kindly, but all I could think was, yes, I was sharp enough to help them kill people more efficiently. I was sharp enough to be useful to monsters. And now, monsters are giving me Christmas dinner. Greta had no comfort to offer. She lay in her own bunk, listening to someone snore, smelling the fading scent of evergreen and candle wax, and felt the full weight of transformation settle over her like snow. The ideological collapse spread through the barracks like illness, person by person, realization by realization. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand moments of conversion, no speeches or declarations. It was cumulative. The daily experience of dignity where they'd expected degradation, humanity where they'd been promised hatred. Frida started questioning first. "If the British are treating us like this," she said one afternoon, folding laundry in the weak January sun, "what were we doing to our prisoners, to the people we captured?" No one answered. They knew vaguely about camps in the East, about harsh conditions for Soviet PS, about labor battalions and starvation rations, but the details had been rumors, unconfirmed stories, things you didn't ask about if you wanted to stay safe. Now those unexamined assumptions felt like lead weights. If British decency was real, and it demonstrably was, then the inverse must also be true. German brutality wasn't propaganda, it was fact. Annalisa researched compulsively, asking guards questions when she could, piecing together information about the Geneva Conventions, the Red Cross, international law. A British sergeant named Morrison, an older man, patient and sad, lent her a copy of the convention text, translated into German. She read it obsessively, underlining passages. "We signed this," she said to Greta, her voice hollow. "Germany signed this in 1929. We agreed to all of it. Proper food, medical care, humane treatment, male privileges. We agreed, and then we just didn't follow it." "For some prisoners," Greta said carefully, "Western prisoners, Americans and British, they were treated better, more or less according to the rules. And Soviet prisoners?" Annalisa's voice was steel. "Jews, Poles, what about them?" Greta had no answer. The silence between them stretched like a chasm. Spring came slowly to Wiltshire, crocuses pushing through frost-hardened ground, daylight extending in grudging increments. The war continued somewhere beyond the camp's barbed wire. They heard about it in fragments, from guards and newspapers, from BBC broadcasts that filtered through. Germany was losing. Everyone knew it. The Red Army was advancing from the east, Americans and British pressing from the west, the Reich contracting like a dying star. In March, new prisoners arrived, women captured in the final collapse of the Rhinemund, hollow-eyed and skeletal, still wearing the shock of defeat like a second skin. Greta helped process them, typing names onto forms, watching their faces as they received coats and food and were escorted to barracks with real beds. She saw her own journey reflected, the disbelief, the suspicion, the slow dawning recognition that this captivity wasn't the hell they'd anticipated. One of the new arrivals, a girl named Helga, who couldn't have been more than 19, asked Greta, "When does it get bad? When do they start hurting us?" "They don't," Greta said. "This is it. This is how it is." Helga stared at her like she was insane. "But we're enemies. We're German. They should hate us." "They do," Greta said slowly, working it out as she spoke. "Some of them do. I've seen it in their faces, the anger. Sergeant Morrison lost his son at Dunkirk. Corporal Davies' brother died in North Africa. They have every reason to hate us. but they follow rules anyway. They treat us humanely, not because we deserve it, but because they believe in something bigger than revenge. She'd never articulated it before. The realization felt like swallowing glass. The British weren't kind because they were soft or weak or manipulated by propaganda. They were kind because they'd chosen a system that demanded it, a set of principles that applied even to enemies, even when it hurt. And Germany, her Germany, had chosen the opposite, had built a system predicated on hatred and hierarchy and the absolute denial of common humanity. "I don't understand," Helga whispered. "Neither did I," Greta said. "You will." VE Day came in May. Victory in Europe. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Reich collapsed into rubble and occupation zones. Hitler dead in a bunker. The news reached Camp 23 on May 8th via BBC broadcast playing in the mess hall. The British soldiers cheered, embracing each other, some weeping openly. The German women sat in silence, absorbing the finality. That night, Lieutenant Colonel Hartley addressed them. Standing at the front of the mess hall with his uniform perfectly pressed, his face grave. "The war is over," he said in his careful accented German. "Germany has surrendered. You will remain here as prisoners until repatriation can be arranged, likely within the next several months. I know this is difficult news. I know some of you have families in the Soviet zone, and I cannot promise what you will find when you return home. But I want you to know that while you are here, you will continue to be treated in accordance with international law. You will continue to be safe." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Then, "Many of you have asked me why. Why we fed you, clothed you, treated you with basic decency. The answer is simple. It's what the law requires. Yes, but more than that, it's what we chose to be. When we decided to fight this war, we decided to fight it without becoming what we fought against. We chose to remain human. I hope when you return home, you remember that. I hope you build something better." The silence that followed was absolute. Greta felt tears streaming down her face, hot and shameful. Beside her, Margot was shaking, and Annalisa had buried her hands in her hands. Hartley nodded once, then left. The gramophone played something quiet and sad. Vera Lynn, perhaps, singing about white cliffs and homecoming. The British soldiers filed out slowly, leaving the German women to their grief and revelation. Repatriation began in July. They were processed alphabetically, given travel documents, escorted to trains bound for ports where ships would carry them back to a Germany that no longer existed as they'd known it. Greta's turn came on July 18th, 1945, exactly 1 year and 1 day after her capture. She packed her few possessions, the clothes she'd been issued, a few letters from her mother, Annalisa's diary, gifted to her with solemn ceremony the night before, the coat, the British Army winter coat that had been given to her that first November morning. She tried to leave behind, folding it carefully on her bunk, but Corporal Davies found her at the gate and pressed it back into her hands. "Take it," he said. "You'll need it. Winters are cold in Berlin." "I can't," Greta said. "It's yours, British Army property." Davies shrugged. "War's over, love. Property doesn't matter anymore. People do. Take the coat. Remember that someone gave it to you when they didn't have to." She took the coat. She wore it on the train to Southampton, on the ship across the Channel, on the long broken journey through occupied Germany to Berlin. She wore it through the winter of 1945 to 1946, the coldest winter in decades, when coal was scarce and buildings stood skeletal, and thousands died of cold and hunger. The coat kept her alive, but more than that, it kept her honest. Her mother was alive, miraculously, thin and aged but alive, living in 2 rooms of their damaged apartment building. Berlin was a moonscape of rubble, the Reich reduced to dust and collective shame.
Greta found work with the American occupation authorities, typing again, translating documents. She met other former prisoners, women who'd been held in camps across Britain, and their stories were all variations on the same theme. We expected hell. We received humanity. We didn't deserve it. We learned from it. Some became pariahs for speaking about it, accused of betraying German suffering, of minimizing Allied bombing raids. Others were simply disbelieved. The idea of humane British camps contradicted the comfortable narrative of mutual atrocity. But Greta kept talking, kept telling her story, kept holding up the coat as evidence. She married an American officer in 1948, immigrated to Ohio, lived an ordinary life teaching German at a high school. She kept the coat in a trunk in the basement. Her children found it after she died in 1997, the wool moth-eaten but still intact, British Army labels still visible inside the collar. Annalisa became a nurse in Hamburg, then a vocal pacifist, then a teacher who specialized in peace education. She published her diary in 1963, heavily edited and annotated under the title, "What They Gave Us When We Deserved Nothing." It sold poorly and was attacked by veterans groups. She didn't care. "Someone has to tell the truth," she said in a rare interview. "Someone has to say they were better than us. They chose to be better, and we have to learn from that, or we learn nothing from any of it." Margot never fully recovered. The ideological collapse broke something in her that never quite healed. She worked in a library in Munich, lived alone, corresponded extensively with Greta and Annalisa, but rarely spoke about the war. She died in 1979, and her letters were donated to the German Historical Institute. Historians mining those archives found repeated phrases. "We were wrong about everything. They showed us what we should have been. Why couldn't we see it before it was too late?" History is full of moments that challenge what we think we know. Subscribe to see more stories that change everything. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest times, humanity can choose something better. The knock came at dawn, metallic and deliberate. And what followed wasn't the vengeance Greta Hoffmann had been promised. It was breakfast. It was coats. It was ordinary human decency, extended across an abyss of enmity and guilt. That ordinariness was the most devastating thing of all. The revelation that the line between barbarism and civilization wasn't fixed, wasn't inherent to any nation or people. It was a choice made daily in small actions and large systems, in the decision to see enemies as humans who might need a coat in winter. They screamed at the knock. They cried over a chocolate bar, over porridge, over a Welsh nurse's gentle hands bandaging a wound. Those moments didn't erase what Germany had done or absolve anyone of their complicity, but they proved that another way was possible, that even in war, even across enemy lines, it was possible to choose not cruelty, but law, not revenge, but restraint, not hatred, but the stubborn insistence that all people deserved baseline dignity. What happened that day in November 1944 would become one of the least known chapters of the POW experience, buried under larger narratives of victory and defeat. But for Greta and the others, it was the hinge on which everything turned, the moment when the world revealed itself to be both worse and better than they'd imagined. Worse because their own complicity couldn't be denied anymore. Better because someone else's humanity proved that transformation was possible. The coat hung in a basement in Ohio for decades after Greta died, British wool slowly disintegrating into fiber and memory. But the lesson it represented, the choice it symbolized, remains sharp and necessary. In a world that constantly offers reasons for cruelty, someone chose to give coats to enemies who expected to freeze. That choice echoes still, a quiet insistence that we can be better than our worst impulses, that we can build systems that hold even when hatred screams for release, that the test of civilization isn't how we treat friends, but how we treat those we have every reason to destroy. They were given coats instead, and in that small, devastating kindness, everything changed.